good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Beezone studio recording tonight. A special guest in our studio, and it is Leroy Stilwell, the author of Love's Sacrifice and the Ordeal to Become Human. And the subtitle is 30 Years with my spiritual master, Ordeal, who he has spent many, many years with in many different circumstances. So it's a privilege to have you here tonight. So thank you for coming.
Great, thanks, Ed.
And the book has just been published by, self-published, I believe, right?
Yeah, right.
And so this is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, this is actually the first book, what I would be calling a Leela book, about Ordeal and the relationship between the devotee and the spiritual master that has been published, that I know of. Is that true?
Yeah, it's not only just the first one to be published since his passing, but it's actually the first book.
First book by a devotee to write any stories about Ordeal that has been publicly published, not within the institution, but outside of the institution of Ordeal.
Yeah, that's dedicated about the real personal relationship to him, and it's gone on. There's been a couple other books that have tried to, contextualize who Ordeal is within a traditional context, but as a story about one person's relationship to him over a significant period of time, it's the first book.
Which is quite remarkable, since his teaching began in 1970, I believe, and that makes many, many years of teaching and work with apparently thousands of people. Very, very little has been published outside of the Dawn Horse Press or the press within the institution into the public. So this is to me, quite a gesture and a gift for you to be doing into the world. I found the book very interesting.
Well, I'm glad it's that way. I'm glad you appreciate it that way, and it turns out that that's what other devotees are telling me. They're telling me how much they appreciate hearing the full story of what it was like to live with Ordeal, the intimate details of it, the personal struggle that I went through, because Ordeal never said it was easy, and he always acknowledged how difficult it was, and he always acknowledged how difficult even the relationship with him would be because of who we are, our reactions to everything about surrender, authority, or whatever, or just having to discipline ourselves in a spiritual path.
I guess that's where you get the book, the title of the book, On Becoming Human. I think you mentioned that in the book, and why I see in the book where the title came from.
Yeah. Well, the title is interesting because the title actually started out as a struggle to become human. Because I felt, what could I really acknowledge that I could say about my whole time with Ordeal? What could I describe? What could I bring to a conclusion as a story? And although obviously it's quite a spiritual path, and there's a lot to be said about the process of spiritual realization as I do, what could I summarize and end with? And that was about the process that became the foundation for spiritual realization, and that I found difficult. The struggle of self-transcendence, the struggle to incarnate as a human being, as love in relationship. And not easy.
Well, I was looking at because I know you only peripherally in the old days when I was 3 years with the community, and I knew of you, but I never really had a relationship with you. But I knew you as Dennis.
Yeah.
And so when I said, well, why is he going with Leroy? And I figured maybe it was a name that Ordeal gave you. And then in the book you tell the story of how, two people, when you were doing the weather, I believe, or doing something along the service of Ordeal, the two people have the name Dennis and the other guy's name was Francis or something, and you picked Leroy, but it also fit a characteristic of you, big bad Leroy Brown, Jim Croce's song. Somehow it fit your personality.
Well, I don't know about fitting my personality. I mean, it was the contrast between sort of like the mild-mannered Dennis and the alter ego that would big bad Leroy Brown. So it was that thing that, I mean, so that Ordeal laughed when he heard that was one of the options for my name. And so then
well, you definitely showed yourself as big bad Leroy Brown in one of your vignette stories in the book when you get in your sumo wrestling crouch position, and I'm going, no, he's not going to do that. And I'll leave that later on for the people who can read the book, because it's a fabulous little vignette in the story of your relationship to Ordeal. But I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about the book itself, because it is the first book, and I wanted to know, how did you work with, I do know the institution, or Ordeal itself, publishes all the materials. In my work in the Beezone, I work with them, and there's always a kind of a, they feel that they want to keep the pristine word of Ordeal out there. So just basically, if you would, to any degree, did you have to work with the institution in publishing or writing or getting the word out?
Well, as I say in the book, I was an editor for a long time, and I worked in surgeon communications, so I was very intimately involved with the whole process that you're talking about. So I knew from the very beginning what that process was like. And I also knew that I had a responsibility to Ordeal to speak both straightforwardly and speak clearly, and to not be angular, not use a memoir either consciously or unconsciously to how to say, be vindictive in one's own experience, in relationship with people, because it's, like I said, sadhana was difficult. Life in Ordeal can be difficult in relational things, and all the memoir books, they advise you to be aware of that, what you're doing when you do that.
Little bit of like, oh, I'm going to get back at this guy.
Yeah, right. So, but all along, also, what I made a decision at some point that, one, I wanted the book, most of all, it had to be usable to devotees.
Okay, so that's another area that I wanted to cover. Yeah. Is this book written for the general public, or is it for people who have some interest, or particularly a strong interest in Ordeal?
Well, I wanted to, I had to make a decision about that, the audience early on. But most important, I felt like my obligation was that for anyone who became interested in Ordeal, they had to know what it was really like. Or at least one person's genuine experience of life with them and the difficulties with them. And as I reflected on my experience, I thought, well, God, I have really so much experience, both in the type of service I did with them and the type of spiritual experience. It was instructive in a unique way because of the breadth of it. But then those devotees, I mean, however many there will be in the future, however many there are now, that was a rather limited audience. And Ordeal, he was always, said that, well, anyone can be my devotee, and he was here for anyone who wanted to be. So I also wanted the book to be available and accessible to non-devotees, so that throughout my entire process, I knew, well, I was aware that, there's a lot of these unconscious motives and even misunderstandings of what had gone on in my relationship with devotees and with Ordeal. So I decided early on, every step of the way, I wanted to have it reviewed to get feedback. So after that first version, I made new friends who were writers, not associated with Ordeal at all, read the book and give me feedback. Plus devotees, read the book and give me feedback. So they'd give me feedback. So
Well,
cut the book down by half.
which brings a question to, there was one individual, Terry Andrews,
Yeah, Terry.
who you gave the book to.
Yeah.
And he gave you feedback. She
She.
gave you feedback. And I was looking on the cover for people who wrote about the book, and I was waiting to see something from Terry, but I didn't see anything from Terry. I saw something from Chris Tong and a couple of people, one from Texas, I believe, and stuff, but Terry didn't write anything.
Well, as you saw also at the end of the book, I had further conversations, and I'd seen, met with Terry on a couple of different occasions, that there's a story of my relationship with Terry in the back, and her relationship, spontaneous relationship with Ordeal. So because there was that level of it going on, I didn't even ask her. I felt like sometimes I would ask for feedback from people, and I'd say, this is just between you and me, confidentially, candid feedback. What about this? Was there anything you didn't understand in the book? Was there anything angular in the book? Was there anything that offended you in the book? So I was constantly getting that feedback, and so a lot of that was just for my information only, and then that was the agreement.
Well, one of the things that I found, and there's no kind of hiding the fact that I'm a very, very interested student about it, is that the book is, your writing style is very smooth and very inviting and engaging. The story you tell is very personal, and also brings in the whole spiritual dimension, but doesn't get too cultic, if you will. So my sense is that the book can be read from whatever vantage point you are in the process of approaching Ordeal. So if you want to just curiously look at Ordeal as you read anything about him, then the book actually serves that process to whatever degree you move into his sphere. I found it.
Yeah. Well, that also was a decision I took at the beginning. I felt like, so the devotees would be interested in no matter what, in a way, but there was more to be said. I wanted to encourage people in their own impulse to profundity, their own impulse to whatever spiritual impulse that was. I wanted the book to be an encouragement for that, not just, not like a proclamation or a cultic kind of thing, but to know that, that you can, you should. It's valid. It's spiritual life is real. Right. But what I found that, looking back on the story, what I thought was even unique about the story that I could tell was that the story about Roberta.
Rebecca, which is, if people have read the book and watching it, and as I did, you gotta ask, because it really put you through. The story talks a lot in the beginning about Dennis's, or Leroy's, relationship to his wife, who had complications and various medical procedure and wound up having some brain damage. And he had to take care of her, and at one point in time of his journey had to bring her back home and really give her back to her family in many ways. And if you want a human wrenching decision, a story that really, as you put in the book, haunted you, and not even consciously, but you had to resolve or work out 13, I believe, years later. That is something. So, how was she?
Yeah. Well, let me just finish what I was saying about that, and that is that. So I felt that my story, in contrast to, maybe in contrast to some stories that would be just about the relationship to Ordeal, I felt there was so much in my personal life that was brought into it. That also became a direct content that was there immediately for him to have to deal with. And, as you see, it is in the book. But I felt that made my book sort of like inherently, my story inherently, something that everybody could read. And I felt to myself, as long as someone wasn't objecting, you know, just plain old to relationship to a spiritual master, then I wanted my story to be a story that they could read, that could grab them, and that it would be interesting from the human point of view, the human, like you say, the wrenching humanness of that incident, and there's something like that in almost everybody's life in one way or another. And then carry that through in a similar quality through the whole thing, my relationship to Kathleen, my relationship to Ordeal, and all that. Because I also felt that relative to the spiritual process itself, that whole life with Roberta, the whole demand that was in terms of real relationship, real feeling, set the stage for spiritual life altogether. Not in the sense that you know, you go to spiritual life as a refuge away from life, but that, to use Ordeal's phrase, the sacred space of spiritual life is feeling. And so I felt that that's what I obliged myself to in even beginning to write the book, is that I had to write from the depth of feeling, and that a reader, that whole thing with Roberta was probably the best way to drop us into the sacredness of just the open feeling relationship to life altogether. And
well, it definitely does it.
And then whatever there was in the rest of the book, the relationship to Ordeal, relationship to Kathleen, it would serve the greater reality and what that greater process would be in any reader's individual circumstance.
Well, I mean, you know, it has its own particular personal dynamic, but it also has that feeling. What you're calling the reader to respond with, and to that you're trying to generate, is really the feeling of life, the mortality of life, the fragility of life, what kind of the circumstances that we have here. Is this just a weekend novel that you can take to the beach? Maybe, but it also has a potent message to it, you know, and the fragility of this thing we call bodily existence and life as we know it. So it really brings the reader in quite strongly.
I had two responses to that. As I had a devotee write to me and say, well, you know, this is not a light read.
Well,
but it's not also, it's not a depressing read. But it was so funny. He was the first person to say that. You know.
Really? Well, I think it was, but I just talked to a neighbor. As you can see, this book is well frayed. I've passed it to a number of people, and although it's not a light read, this person who read the book was put through the same ordeals that you were put through, because you went through a real confrontation with your whole emotional, sexual relationships, your play with Ordeal put you through it, and anybody who reads it in that way is going to also be put through it. So she was commenting on her relationship to her husband as she's reading your book, and your relationship with various people in your book was putting her through it. So it's not it's a book about real life, you know. So one of the things that I missed in the book were pictures.
Yeah.
And not that I'm just a storybook kind of picture guy, but at least a couple of pictures of maybe some of the ashram or Ordeal or
There's a reason for that, obviously, and the reason has to do with the whole process of the book and the review process and the cultural process involved with it. Is that it is true that that what my book stimulated was the consideration of these books. You know, are they just the devotee's voice? And of course everybody can tell their own story, but how much are they like representative of Adida? How much do they really represent his teaching? And I had to seriously think about that, because what was being reflected in me is that because of the services that I had done, I mean, ashram manager, a personal assistant to the renunciate order and all of that, that what I say might carry more of a cultural type authority than somebody else. Maybe not, I don't know. But, so what about that, or what about any devotee saying that? So there's, should books be approved? Should they have sort of like a stamp of authenticity? Or whatever. My book stimulated that whole conversation. And that conversation hasn't finished yet. And I didn't know when the conversation was going to finish. So my publishing is in a sense an unauthorized version. And I personally, I wasn't asking for authorization or approval, because for me, devotee just has a right. Anybody just has a right to tell their life story. And of course, my story is meant to honor Adida as my spiritual master. And that honoring that means that it has to really be my story, really. So because the formalities of all those processes hadn't been included, there wasn't a way for me to get, there hadn't been consideration for approval for photos in a private publication.
No, you got to need copyright.
Yeah, so, I wasn't, I didn't want to violate copyright or anything like that. So in our discussions with them, as much as I tried, to say, well, this is the way we can resolve this. So, and there would be good, and it is being one of the considerations, that there just be certain pictures that any devotee can use in any book, but that hadn't been finished or formalized yet. So, I'm still first there on the docket when that happens. They have approval for photos. And then, of course, what's so great about print on demand and self-publishing, as soon as that happens, photos go in, and it'll be only off the market for 3 days.
Well, I think it would be an added benefit to the book to have pictures of the story that you tell. But one of the things that I wanted to get also too is the diverse background that you have. I mean, a pilot, a psychiatric technician, a French major, translator, a computer technician, a social worker, a medic, a weatherman, a glass etcher, a photographer, an editor, a biologist. I mean, you have quite a range of skills.
Yeah,
and a writer.
Well, that's just the way it is. Just kind of, I don't know, I just had all those interests.
And what are you doing now?
Well, right now, so I live on the Mountain of Attention Sanctuary, and I'm the fire marshal, and I'm the security manager. So I'm generally responsible for the safety and security of the Mountain of Attention Sanctuary.
When you brought up the fire marshal, that kind of threw me into the weather man, or the weather person, or the weather god, I called you in the book, because you were responsible to communicate with the god. I was interested in that tree.
Okay, the weather tree.
The weather tree.
Yeah.
Which is a fabulous story of Adida directing you to one location on the island that he said was the center of the weather?
Well, there was a tree associated with the weather, was the way that he would do it, and so that his instructions were for me to enter in relationship with that tree and serve it as, however these things work, for me to enter into feeling relationship with the process, the natural processes that the weather, or the person that is the weather, or the personality that was the weather, and then all the natural persons or natural personalities that are associated with the weather, like the birds, the hawks in the case of the story. So that was, so yeah.
Well, that was interesting because in the traditions, when you can read various stories of great teachers and saints and sages and yogis, weather is definitely associated with their presence.
Yeah.
And not only in that kind of relationship with a person, but that's also in the, I mean, geographically, mountains are known to kind of have certain kinds of relationships with weather, and various topographies have certain weather patterns that go along with it. I found it fascinating. One of the stories in your book, your story is about the Leela, because it really is a Leela. It's always a Leela.
Yeah.
The story about your relationship of serving Adida in the capacity that you did. So, and you're still married to Kathleen, I believe?
Yeah, well, we were married, then divorced, which was, part of one of our considerations within the community about, the purpose of marriage and things like that. And we got divorced and stayed together. Didn't make a big deal out of it. The only person who made a big deal out of it was my father. One day he called me and says, "Oh, is there something you're not telling us?" Because he had seen in the local newspaper, the County Record B, he had seen notice of divorce. His son and Kathleen had gotten divorced, and no one had said anything about it. No, but Kathleen and I have been together for 30 years. Yes.
Now, did she cooperate with you in terms of writing, or how did she work with you? Because she's such a big part of the book.
Yeah, yeah. Every little section, as I completed a section, a story, Kathleen read, and it was wonderful because she was there for a lot of it, and so she could help remind me of different things, or say I don't remember it that way, or whatever it was. So yes, so she was a big part of it, and like it was too, because she was part of it, she could let me know how she was really feeling at the time of these things. That would help me get in touch with sides maybe I wasn't remembering about it in my own feeling, or in the process of reliving the story, continue on with the process that maybe might have stopped at that period of time. So that's what a lot of the book was.
That comes through a lot when, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she went in to say goodbye to your father.
Yeah, yeah.
And she came out. I'm sure that was a kind of a dialogue between you and her, but it was really strong on how much Kathleen is a part of the book.
Yeah, it's an interesting part about that too, because you know how when you're with someone so long and you're married or whatever, how you become part of their family. She really felt part of our family, and wanted to be. She really, really, really wanted to be, and that's a positive side of that. And so the downside of that is that her own family reacted so much to her involvement with Adida, and had become relatively, consciously uncommunicative with her because of her involvement. So she became part of my family, even though my family wasn't like positive, and they were just, it was sort of like more incredulous.
Right.
But
So
that didn't affect our relationship. All they wanted to make sure was that I stayed in contact with them.
Right, right. So apparently Kathleen's family just cut her off from contact and didn't want anything to do with it. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions of various sections of the book. And the first one I wanted to ask you about is after you saw The Difficult Man, and you walked out, and I believe it was 1976.
Yeah, 75.
75. And he said, "Gee, I wish that guy were alive." And somebody commented, well, you correct me if I'm wrong, and he said, "Well, he is alive. He just wrote The Garbage and the Goddess, and And something, because in the book, you say, I found something.
Yeah.
Could you speak to a little bit about that? Was it that dramatic? I mean, apparently it was.
Well, watching the movie, it was. I was just responding throughout the entire movie. I just loved it. His clarity, his humor, his freedom, his laughter, his irreverence, the whole thing. It was just so hard and emotionally freeing and opening. But then, so I went in there thinking he was dead. And so all this was going on, and then I come out, and I don't know what I was thinking. I was just go on and carry on with my life. But to find out that, he was really alive, it was just a total shock and opening. It was a shock of a change of mind, and just obviously an opening into a whole new possibility. Right. But it was it was like that. It wasn't any question or any thinking about it. For some people it's like that, of course. We probably both know people who've read the teaching for years and years and years, before they felt, they would like to be a devotee or whatever. Right. But it was just that. And later on in the book, I talk about the dream, that recurring dream I'd had as a child, and then I had the opportunity to ask him if somehow that dream wasn't a connection to him previously. So, how do these things work? So I don't know. So that spontaneous thing, it might not have been what we think of that spontaneous.
Right.
Right. It's just that acknowledgement of a reconnect that's, that you can't really say anything about as a present time human being. It's just something involved in this process that's going on that's at least indescribable from my present perspective.
Well, he always talks about that this world is a spontaneous process, and so you never really get a precursor, or you're seeing spontaneous events happening in this world today, from everything to what's going on in Libya and Egypt. There's no precursors. There's no like, oh well, this happened and then the Berlin Wall fell, or this happened and it's really so. I guess one of the things that's clear in that your understanding or your knowing that this was your teacher happened in a spontaneous and dramatic fashion. And for many people, as you mentioned, it's a slow kind of approach of boiling water at 211 degrees or whatever. Yeah. It's just slowly approaching. But it's always, and even in the tradition, says that this is not just happens in this one lifetime. That there's a connection happening, and it's reestablishing itself. Yeah. So,
and even then after that, there's the process of getting used to it.
Well, yes.
Of acknowledging of acknowledging the process, of acknowledging your own inevitable decision and your own inevitable life. And I hadn't thought much about this, in this way, except now that you just brought it up. But a lot of times now I see on the internet a lot of folks speaking about spontaneous awakenings. And it's really impressed me rather remarkably how much there is. Now, I don't know if that was always going on, or it's just now that we're so communicative that people talk about it. But that's such a common phrase, even about some dramatic moment, an awakening into a whole other understanding, acknowledgement how reality is, and then the years it takes to integrate that.
And adapt and integrate and fully understand it.
Yeah. And so it's something like that, acknowledging your attraction to spiritual master, acknowledging your attraction to the guru, to the greater reality that's manifesting through this person, or one who seems to be a different person, and getting used to being in relationship with that. Like, I don't know, it probably takes years to get used to being married. I I know, like, I think I talked to, I don't know if I said it specifically in the book, that along the theme of the ordeal to become human, is that it took 14 years of being with Kathleen, 12 to 14 years of marriage, before I could feel I was loved. That was remarkable to me. That was a remarkable acknowledgement to me. And it's, but I hear people who, just get together with somebody, and for the first time in their lives they're feeling loved or something like that. It took me 14 years, and for some people it's...
Well, are you speaking at a depth of level that most people don't even get to? I mean, most people are attracted to their other spouse, a significant other, and then play out this kind of struggle of, you don't love me, I don't love you, you don't love me, I don't love you. I mean, but that obviously, I mean, you had some sense of connection with Kathleen, but but I'm thinking that you're referring to something much deeper beyond this, what the Oedipal is, you don't love me, I don't love you kind of stuff, not the game of back and forth, where you're completely surrendered and touched in that deeper place.
Yeah, I am, and of course, and like Adidas says, most of love is working it out, not just the attraction, And so that level of developing intimacy, because what intimacy came to be is that when you acknowledge this process of self-transcendence that the other person is involved in. So for seeing Kathleen transcend herself in her spiritual practice in relationship to me, seeing what she had to tolerate in me, my love, keep staying in the relationship. Of course, I was doing the same, but at some point, it's like the cumulative effect of seeing that someone's life was really about going beyond themselves, and that you were part of that, and that's part of what life really is. That's, so that's what marked that point there. But what I was saying also is that somehow, I mean, I've just heard some people say, some friends say about that, entering into a relationship with someone, that it wasn't just that immediate fascination or infatuation, but it somehow was that depth connection. So certainly it's not the same thing that's you could say like earned or grown out of a real life, ordeal of mutual loving, mutual self-sacrifice, mutual self-transcendence. But there was a depth. I mean, so for me, I felt like, and I still do for me, it's a constant awareness of the pain of superficiality and the self-discipline of going beyond that, the discipline of feeling.
Or as you say, becoming human, because without that feeling awakened part of your life, then you have the elemental level and the basic drives of whether you're a Freudian or whoever, you just have the animalistic kind of drives without any real feeling connection to another being and what they're having to go through. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your personal play with Ordeal, because it's so rare, truly, in the people that I know that can really say that a master, whether he be an Indian or a Sufi or a Tibetan or a spiritual master like Ordeal, have a personal one-to-one Leroy Brown kind of connection. What was it like to be in his personal company and be addressed and embraced and challenged, and could you just speak to that?
It's hard to speak, to as a direct question. What was it like, because was some, like, you, in a sense, you were always in love, you know, and always there in front of him in love, and that the basis of being in front of him was that you fell in love, and I was moved towards, you know, something greater than what my life was, moved toward realization in some kind of way, moved to that. But at the same time, knowing that I've also given this apparent other permission to do anything to awaken me, to get me straight, you know. So it's unique in that way, is that so that you're always there. You're in love, but you're standing in front of the firing squad. You know, it's like, so it was always, sometimes when you weren't worried about that, all it is just you're with him, you're both in love. And I describe this many times in the book. The characteristic of him is that he's just melted. Round-faced, watery eyes, watery everything. And you're being turned to water and emotion and dissolved and all that at the same time. And it's wonderful if that continues to be that way, and whatever else happens in terms of even moving beyond experiential dimension of that. But then, when you need to be addressed, then your quality can be of simple apprehension, or simple, you know, wanting to make things right with them, you know, wanting to do that, to utter terror, you know, utter fear, because you never know what he was going to do. He might do something spontaneously, like the sumo wrestling that I told you about.
We'll leave that for you to read the book on.
Or you don't know, you know, kick you off the island, or he could be yelling at you. You know, you just go into, you know, what devotees, well, certain devotees wouldn't do with everyone, but with certain devotees, you have the kind of relationship where you just go into full volume yelling at you, you know. But then again, several things could be going on. You know, you never felt personally like chastised in a certain way. You did, but it wasn't like his anger was like personal. But somehow it just like blow through you like a hurricane going through you, or fire singeing all of you. But that was totally, you know, sort of like enlivening in a certain way. Not that you felt, you know, light in the moment. And so that's one aspect. Another aspect was that, you know, there was always this sense of something more going on in the relationship with him. Like, you know, you were there and he was just doing something with you, and it was affecting who knows what else at the same time. My personal experience, though, is, you know, all of that has been part of my personal experience, but I know a quality of it was that for many, many years I didn't know what was going on, you know, in my relationship with him. And so I had a conventional attitude with him, and I'd relate conventionally in a certain kind of way. And so, you know, I didn't know what, and I couldn't receive him. And I always felt that very acutely, meaning that I received, some devotees will talk about when Ordeal would, you know, look at them, or touch them, or they would receive literal spiritual transmission. But that was rare for me. I mean, I speak about the times clearly when that was happening, but it was referring to me at that time. You know, it usually happened later in meditation.
Well, you have a whole section in there entitled "The Beginnings of a Broader Experience," and that's pretty much what I hear you saying now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
which has an energetic, spiritual energy to it.
Yeah. And so there were some devotees who were capable of right there with him, face to face. They would describe their experience with him in most remarkable spiritual terms. For me, a couple of times with that. So for me, a lot of the times was him doing something with me acknowledging that, being able to acknowledge that something was going on, but then not being available, yogically or emotionally to feel it at that moment. It would be another time. It could be just, hours later in meditation or years later when I finally got something where then the actual spiritual effects of those were happening. But otherwise, and I don't talk about it much in the book. I wish I could have found a way to say more about it in the book, but what seemed to me to be constraints of trying to develop a book along a certain kind of theme and carry it along and not have it be a 2,000-page book.
Right.
There's so much of the time with him that was just hysterically funny. Hysterically funny. I mean, he was, so entertaining, so funny, so amusing, so spontaneously, creative and amusing. It was remarkable. And so there was a lot of that in the gatherings with him and times with him that was one of his ways of engaging us, and it was so utterly delightful. The stories about his life, or just his spontaneous humor with us all together, because not having a limited perspective or point of view on anything, his humor was,
amazing.
It just opened you up in so many ways.
Well, I think one of the things that comes through when I'm listening to you is, from what other people have said, his attractive quality. I mean, you don't even have to have a mind around it or in it or whatever. It's that there was something way farther, bigger, more attractive than anything that could possibly have been even conceived of from our little your point of view. I mean, this particular person had and we're not talking charisma here, we're talking a certain spiritual power that was so far beyond anybody's comprehension. That was so attractive.
Well, and also, what was good for me in reviewing the book, because in writing the book and reviewing everything, one of the reasons I had to write the book, in the sense that he passed, and there was something in me that had to make sense of my life with him, because I'd made decisions, all kinds of different decision points about staying with him and being with him, and so those points they were clarified in my book, and in the sense that and through some difficult times in the relationship with him, meaning not that he and I were in conflict, but then the difficulty of the process, the difficulty of self-revelation that was going on, and being willing to stay with it, I had to acknowledge that no matter what I can say, no matter how I feel, I know I'm his devotee. That's just the way it is. That's sort of like the ground of my being a person, that I could acknowledge that.
Well, you bring that comes across in the book when the trials of your sadhana come through, and that's one of I think the benefits of anybody to read the book is that this is a process, and you were tested not only in the fact that you were brought back from the island and expecting to be put into some kind of position and didn't have that position, or later on when you were reading the things on the internet And when Adida and the book, when the website that you started with Chris Tong, adidaupclose.org, was starting, that you were reading things on the internet, and you found so many negative things in the beginning that it brought up doubt that you didn't even have an idea about.
Right, yeah.
So that deeper sense of what this whole sadhana is a purification process.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
And as he says, if you just stay in place, stay with me, you know.
Yeah.
Because you'll be shown all sorts of things that are not the cutest and the sweetest of the things.
Yeah.
It's not just love and light. I'm kind of watching the clock as we're speaking, and I know we're coming to the end of our hour here, so I wanted to basically first say that you're going to be speaking to a group of people on this week sometime?
Yeah, Wednesday.
Wednesday night, where?
At the, whatever the address is, 17 Paul Drive at the Donda.
Oh, okay. So the Adidam Center in San Rafael at 7.
Yeah, 7:30.
7:30 on Wednesday, and I'll put the date in there when we put this on the web. And do you have any ways of further getting this book out? How are you getting word out?
Well, so first of all, it's on its own website, www.30yearswithadida.com. It's available on Amazon. It's available on amazon.co.uk. So those are the places. I haven't even thought about bookstores or anything like that. You know, and that's a whole other dimension that I'm doing. So it's mainly through those websites. And I figured in writing it, because of the quality and the content of the book, mainly it's a book that people will read and want their friends to read. That want it to be that interesting and that engaging. So it's word of mouth because it's a real story. It's a profound story, a profound process. And so recommendation.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely recommending, if you want a book that is a first-hand account of a relationship with a true spiritual master, and the process of what Dennis and others in his relationships go through, then I definitely recommend Love, Sacrifice, and the Ordeal to Become Human, 30 Years with My Spiritual Master, Adida. So if you get an opportunity, please take a look at it. I know you'll enjoy it, and I want to thank Dennis for coming here tonight.
Great, thanks a lot, Ed.
All right,
Yeah,
good night.
appreciate it.
So stay tuned to our next interview, and we'll keep in touch. Good night.